If you're watching this video, you've probably downloaded one of the spreadsheets made by property planners. Thank you very much for your download. As fellow landlords, we understand the challenges of property management. Our mission is to share the tools we've developed to simplify your business operations, allowing you to focus on what truly matters. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris to walk you through how to use it.
Hey everyone. In this video, I'm going to explain how to use the rental property bookkeeping spreadsheet to make your life easier so you can focus more on property management and running your business. Without further ado, let's get started. The first sheet you'll see is the Welcome Sheet. This sheet provides a basic overview of what the spreadsheet can do with some basic instructions to get started. Let's move on to the Setup Sheet. This is the Setup Sheet. This is the sheet that other sheets will pull information from for the drop-down lists. Throughout the other sheets, you'll see drop-down lists being used. The nice thing about drop-down lists is that it makes inputting data easy because you don't have to type. And secondly, it keeps data entry consistent, which is especially important when creating formulas that use that information. That being said, it's important that you take the time to enter all the information you have about the properties and account categories up front. Let's work through an example of inputting information into the setup sheet. At the top, you'll see a field to input the fiscal month and year start. This would be the starting month and year for your annual financial reporting period or bookkeeping period. If you own properties in your personal name, your annual reporting period for income taxes is normally January to December. If you own properties in a corporation or business, then your fiscal starting month might be another month in the year. Just double-click the date field, and it will open a calendar for you to select a date. Next, we will input a property into the Properties table. If you look down the left side of the table, you'll see an entry number. For this table, it goes to 10, which is the maximum number of entries. Let's go ahead and input a property. 1428 Elm Street, in the state of New York, a zip code of 5555, and a description of single-family home. Next, we will input an income category. You can keep this category simple and just input one category and call it rent. But if you have properties with multiple units or different types of income like coin laundry, and you want to track that income, you can add categories as needed. You can see that I already have some examples here. Let's add one more and call it student rental for the new property I just input. Now, let's input an operating expense. Operating expenses are direct costs associated with running your rental property. We'll input one for cleaning. We'll move on to indirect expenses. Now, let's talk about this one for a minute before we input an example. Indirect expenses are costs that are not tied to a specific property, but needed to manage your business. Let's say you have a smartphone that you expense through your rental property business. That's an indirect expense that applies to all properties and day-to-day operation of the business. Another example is car gas. This spreadsheet will track indirect expenses as a separate category. We'll input one for virtual assistant. And finally, we'll input a debt category. I want to talk about this one a little bit. This spreadsheet can calculate net cash flow and pre-tax cash flow. So what's the difference? Net cash flow is what you have left over after collecting your income, paying your expenses, and mortgage payments. Pre-tax cash flow is the same, except instead of subtracting your mortgage payments, you only subtract the interest portion of the mortgage payment. Pre-tax cash flow is the cash flow that is taxable. The principal payback portion of your mortgage payment is not taxable. As you can see, I already have a mortgage payment category called mortgage and a mortgage interest. So I'm not going to input anything, but we'll go through an example later of how to use this. I want to emphasize that if you want to track mortgage interest and calculate pre-tax cash flow, you must include the word interest in the category name, as the formulas in the sheet will look for this term. When typing the word interest, the letter case doesn't matter, but you need to get the spelling correct, which is I-N-T-E-R-E-S-T. Now, let's move on to the transaction sheet. This is where you're going to spend the majority of the time getting your spreadsheet up and running. Let's work through a few examples using the new property and account categories we just input. Here's a tip when it comes to using the drop-down lists. The best way to input information is from left to right. So, for example, property, account, then category, and you'll see why in a minute. The order in which you input data into the other fields doesn't matter. Let's start with a date, December 1st, 2023. We'll select 1428 Elm Street as the property. Then select Income as the account. Now you'll notice the category dropdown is limited to just the income categories. In other words, the category dropdown list is dependent on the account selected, which is why you need to input the dropdowns left to right. We'll go ahead and select Student Rental as the category, input $3,000 as the amount, and input a note paid on time. Now, let's input an operating expense. Operating expenses are direct costs associated with running your rental property. We'll input one for cleaning. I'll repeat the process for debt, but I'm only going to input a mortgage payment and not mortgage interest for now, just to show you the difference. Finally, I'll input an indirect expense. When inputting an indirect expense, you have to select all properties, since indirect expenses are not tied to a specific property. After you select all properties, the indirect expense category dropdown becomes available. If I go back and change the property to a specific address, then indirect expense doesn't become available. Hence, another reason you need to work left to right for the dropdown lists. So, let's go ahead and select Virtual Assistant as the indirect expense with an amount of $100. That's it for the inputting of transactions. Before moving on from here, there are 5 tips I want to go over. 1. Don't use the Insert Row feature. There are hidden formulas on the right side of the sheet that make the drop-down lists work. If you insert a row, it will break this feature. If you accidentally insert a row, just click Undo. The Undo feature is your best friend. 2. If you edit the descriptions of any drop-down items in the setup sheet, they will show as invalid on the transaction sheet. Let's try this. I'll go to the setup sheet and change the operating expense category description for lawn cutting to lawn mowing, and let's see what happens. As you can see on the transaction sheet, there's a little red triangle beside the transaction that was previously selected as lawn cutting. If I hover over the red triangle, it gives me a warning saying it's invalid. To fix this, you'll have to reselect the affected dropdown. Always double-check your dropdowns for this red triangle. If you see it, then there is a mismatch between the current dropdown selection and what you specified in the setup sheet. 3. You can use the Delete Row feature, but I recommend just re-entering data over the row. 4. If you're deleting data, you can select cells and just press the Delete key. But if you delete the receipt field, it will delete the checkbox. 5. Copying and pasting works. Just copy data from a row and paste it. The last thing I want to go over is filtered views. Filtered views allow you to preview the data with a sort rule applied. There are 3 preset filtered views: by date, by property, and by account. To enable a view, go to Data, Change View, and select the view you want. To exit the view, simply click on this X on the top right, or go to the menu and select Data, Change View, then click on Exit View. Now let's see how all this data looks on the dashboards. This is the monthly dashboard that summarizes data and calculates the key rental property performance indicators, such as cash flow and net operating income. It also provides charts to help you visually understand the performance of your properties. There are 2 items you can select, which are month and property. If I select December 2023 as the month and 1428 Elm Street as the property, the table and charts update automatically. You will also see the financial summary doesn't show debt interest, and the pre-tax cash flow will be the same as net operating income. That's because We didn't input any mortgage interest. Later, I'll input mortgage interest so you can see the difference. If I change the property to all properties, then you'll see everything update again, but now you'll see the indirect expenses being shown in the financial summary, this table below, and in this chart. Remember, indirect expenses are business costs not tied to a specific property, which is why they show up when selecting all properties. Now let's go back to the transaction sheet and input mortgage interest to see what happens. So let's go ahead and input a mortgage interest transaction of $1,200 for 1428 Elm Street in the month of December 2023. Now let's go back to the monthly dashboard. Now, if I select 1428 Elm Street as the property, you'll notice that the debt category now shows a mortgage interest entry, and the financial summary shows pre-tax cash flow. You'll also notice the chart now shows debt interest. The difference between this and this is the equity that you've built for the month. Let's move on to the annual dashboard. The annual dashboard works similar to the monthly dashboard. It will help you analyze the performance of your properties over the year. The graphs can help you easily identify trends in your accounts, net operating income, and cash flow. The only selection you need to make is the property. You can select a single property or all properties, and the data will automatically update, including the charts. Notice when selecting a single property, the indirect expenses will not show anything, and when you select all properties, it will show. You'll also notice this sheet has a Notes section. Feel free to input any notes here. Let's move on to the Analysis sheet. The Analysis sheet provides additional graphs to help you analyze your portfolio. The income charts will help you compare rental income for all your properties from an annual perspective and month over month. The expense pie chart will give a picture of what your biggest expenses are. The expense line chart is really useful to identify trends in property expenses, as well as compare properties against each other. There is no input required on this sheet. As you input more transactions, the graphs will automatically update. Let's talk about the summary table. This is a summary table, or also known as a pivot table. Pivot tables are an advanced feature in spreadsheets and are really powerful tools to help you dive deep into the data and summarize numbers. We've done all the work to set this up for you so you can dive into the data right away. Let's have a look at how this works. First off, you'll notice that there are plus and minus buttons in the property and account columns. This allows you to expand or collapse the groupings. For example, I can click the minus button on a property, and it will collapse all the accounts into a single line. Now, you'll notice a number here under January. This number is not actually meaningful when you collapse a property. Let's expand, and I'll show you why. If you look at the total, it's just the income and operating expenses added together. Remember, pivot tables are powerful tools to some categories of numbers. But if I expand the property, the account categories now show the totals for income and operating expenses separately. These totals are the numbers you see in the monthly dashboard. I can further expand to show the categories. This is where the pivot table becomes really useful. You can do a deep dive into your income and expenses month over month, property by property. Now, if you're starting with a blank spreadsheet and start inputting data, this pivot table won't start updating automatically like the dashboards. I'll show you how to initially set it up, then from there it will automatically update. So I've opened a new spreadsheet with brand new data in the transaction sheet. Now let's go to the summary table sheet. As you can see, it's all blank, even though I have transaction entries. If you hover your mouse cursor over the table, you'll notice a green pencil icon show up in the bottom left corner. Click on this. You'll see the pivot table editor open on the right. Scroll down to the filter section and click on the property filter status. At the bottom, under Filter by Values, click to put a check mark on all the properties in your list, but exclude blanks and all properties. Once you've done that, the table will automatically update as you input transactions. Also, one other thing to note, if you change the description for any of the drop-down list items, you'll first have to update the transaction sheet for it to show up here. And that's it, everyone. If you have any questions on how to use the spreadsheet, please send us an email. Also, we want to hear your feedback. If you have any suggestions for improvement or something isn't working, we want to hear about it. Our email address is in the PDF download that you received when you purchased this spreadsheet. Make sure to check our Etsy store on a regular basis as we add more spreadsheets that will simplify your life. Till next time.